Alright, so in this video we're going to do our last conic, which is a hyperbola. Hyperbolas are very, very similar to ellipses. The only difference is that instead of switching the a and b, the a squared is always going to stay first. So your major axis number, or your major, we call it the transverse axis with hyperbolas, is always going to be first, given to you first. So that's kind of nice. You don't have to remember about switching anything and switching a. So let's start right in with an example for number 1. So in number 1, you know the first denominator here is always going to be a. So in this case, a is equal to the square root of 9, which is 3, and b is equal to the square root of 64, which is 8. Okay? With those now, in order to find your focus point, you're going to have to plug it into the c squared. And in this case, instead of now a squared minus b squared, with the hyperbolas, it's going to be a squared plus b squared. So c squared equals 9 plus 64. So c squared equals 73. Take the square root of both sides, and c is equal to the square root of 73. Now the square root of 73 is probably somewhere around 8.3. So when you graph those, you're going to want to graph them at about 8.3 on the transverse axis. Okay. Now since the a value is associated with x, I know that my transverse axis is going to be along the x-axis. So therefore my vertices are going to have a value of plus or minus 3, 0. Again, the x value, because we just said that the transverse axis was with the x. And then the co-vertices are going to be the opposite, 0, plus or minus the b value of 8. My focus points are going to have the same pattern as my vertice points. So that's going to be plus or minus the c value of root 73, 0. Moving on, this one here, notice it's not equal to 1, so you first have to divide everything by 81 before you can proceed. So that will give you y squared over 81 minus x squared over 1 equals 1. Now notice that, again, a is always first. So in this case, a is the square root of 81, so a is 9. Notice, though, that a is now associated with y squared. That means that it's going to be opposite. And now my transverse axis, where my vertices lie, are going to be on the y-axis. And in this case now b equals 1, because it's the square root of 1. Alright, so now to identify my c value, I'm going to plug them into c squared equals a squared plus b squared again. So that means c squared equals 81 plus 1. So c equals the square root of 82. Now for my vertices, again, my vertices are associated with the y, so therefore it's going to be 0, plus or minus 9, which is the y value for the vertices. Co-vertices are associated with the x, so therefore, again, my b value is 1, so that's going to be plus or minus 1, 0. My focus points are going to be the same pattern as my vertice points, so 0 is going to go first, and then plus or minus the square root of 82. Alright, for number 3, I first need to, again, get this equal to 1, so I need to divide everything by 100. So that makes my equation y squared over 25 over 100 will simplify to 1 over 4, minus x squared over 4 over 100 will simplify to 1 over 25, and that's equal to 1. So therefore, again, a is always first, so a squared equals 4, which means a equals 2. And b equals the square root of 25, which is 5. To find c, I'm going to plug it into c squared equals a squared plus b squared. So c equals the c squared equals 29, and c equals the square root of 29. Therefore, my vertex points, my vertices, are going to be at, again, it's my a value associated with the y. So it's going to be 0, the y values of plus or minus 2. My co-vertices are going to be the opposite of that, but with the b value. The b value is 5, so plus or minus 5, 0. And my focus points are going to have the same pattern as my vertices. So 0, plus or minus the square root of 29. Okay. Now to write an equation, I have to, if I'm given the focus points and the vertices, since my focus points are 13, I know that that means C equals 13. Since my vertices are at 5, I know that A equals 5. Okay, now you have to find B, so you have to plug it in. C squared equals A squared plus B squared, which means 169 equals 25 plus B squared. Subtract 25 from both sides, and 144 equals B squared. Take the square root, and B equals 12. Since B is 12, now that I have A, B, and C, in order to write my equation, I need to decide whether or not the A value is associated with the X or the Y axis. And since my focus points and my vertices are both on the Y axis, I know that my Y axis is a transverse axis, and therefore that is what my A value is going to go with. So remember, A always goes first. So your bottom number is going to be the 5 squared, the A value squared, and we said it was associated with the Y axis, so it's going to be Y squared. So Y squared over 25 minus X squared over the B value, which in this case is 12, so 12 squared is 144, and it's always equal to 1. So this is number 4. It's the answer for number 4. For number 5, same thing, focus is 8, so therefore my C value is 8. Vertices are 6, so that means A equals 6. So now I have to plug into the C squared equals A squared plus B squared. So 8 squared equals 6 squared plus B squared. So 64 equals 36 plus B squared. Subtract 36 from both sides, and B squared equals the square root equals 28, and then the square root of both sides is B equals root 28. So now I'm going to plug it into my equation. So you have to decide, based on my vertex is the X. So therefore I know that the X squared over A squared is going to go first. So X squared over A squared, A is 6, so therefore A squared is 36, minus Y squared over the B squared, so square root of 28 squared is just 28, and that's always equal to 1. So it's X squared over 36 minus Y squared over 28 equals 1. Okay, number 6 I'm going to do down here. Oops. Okay, this is going to be number 6 down here. Again, focus is 7, vertices are 3. So C equals 7, A equals 3. So now I'm going to use C squared equals A squared plus B squared. So 7 squared equals 3 squared plus B squared. So 49 equals 9 plus B squared. Subtract 9. B squared equals 40, so therefore B equals the square root of 40. Now, to write my equation, I have to decide what the A value goes with. Remember, A squared always goes on the bottom, so if you want to just go ahead with hyperbolas and set it up, A squared is 9, B squared is 40, because root 40 squared is 40. Now I have to decide, is this 9 associated with the transverse axis, or is 40 associated with the transverse axis? And what is the transverse axis, X or Y? So I'm going to go back and look at my focus points and my vertex points. 0, negative 3, that is along the Y axis. So therefore, it is associated, the transverse axis is associated with the Y axis. And now I can put my X squared here and complete it with equals 1. Okay, now to graph, remember the A and B are used to draw your rectangle. So, in this case I know A is the square root of 144, which is 12. B is the square root of 121, which is 11. Now, 12 and 11 are going to be hard to graph on this, but so we're going to go ahead and just count by 2's. So, again, since it's with the X, I know that my transverse axis is on the X axis, which is the X axis here. So I'm going to count 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 on the X axis, and then 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 on the X axis, which means the 11's, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11 are going to be on my Y axis, which is just the opposite. And now I'm going to draw my rectangle. And then I know my asymptotes go through the corners of my rectangle. Oops, that wasn't a very good rectangle that I drew. I should use my line tool here. Probably be a little better. Let's just go ahead and undo that. So again, it's going to go through the corners of my rectangle. Okay, now my vertex points are going to be my first number here. So it was, again, my x points. So then you're just going to kind of draw each side of the hyperbola. And this is going to be a really narrow one because it has to reach out to your asymptotes just like that. Okay, so that's how you graph it. To find c, of course, you'd want to plug it in. So it would be c squared equals 144 plus 121. And 144 plus 121 is going to be c squared equals 265, and then the square root of 265. And again, so they're going to be somewhere out here, but you won't have room to graph those on this graph. Okay. Moving on to number 8, again, the first number is always associated with a. So a equals 13, which is the square root of 169. B equals 4. Since the a value is with the y-axis is going to be the transverse axis, the main axis here. So again, counting by 2s, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 13 is going to be all the way here at the ends. And then 4 is going to go here and here. And draw your rectangle. And then your asymptotes are going to pass through the corners of that rectangle. Not a very good line again. Let's try that again. And then over here, same thing. And then your parabolas are going to go with the vertices, which we already said the vertices were the a values and were associated with the y-axis. So there you go. And then your focus points again, c squared equals 13 squared plus 4 squared. So that would be c squared equals 169 plus 16. So c squared equals, what is that, 185. And then the square root. And they, of course, again, are going to be out here within those two branches of your hyperbola. Okay? If you have any questions, you can rewind this or come ask me when you have some time.